Hello, and welcome to another one of my nagging thoughts. I'm the Proverbs 27:16 woman, and I am a little down this week again because I have to go to my friend's funeral next week. Please pray for Marianne's family, that God's comfort would be poured out on all of them and help them heal during this difficult time. Although I do have to say that all her friends and family seem to already have been showered with a very good measure of comfort that comes from having witnessed how strong Marianne's faith was in the face of such serious health battles. Moving on to this week's topic, it's a little hodgepodgey. I really just want to talk about Genesis, but before I do, I want to briefly talk about what's been going on in the Christian community. That you have this Andy Savage who sexually assaulted a minor when he was in the position of a youth pastor, and although it was 20 years ago, he now it wants to start his own church and continue to bear moral authority. And this is doing a lot of harm, especially to other victims of abuse and sexual assault and molestation and things of that nature, particularly when they are wrapped in spiritual abuse. And that's going on. And then also John MacArthur told Beth Moore to be quiet, or to go home. And I just want to say that it's very discouraging that all these messages are coming out really in these conservative Christian circles that are telling women to categorically make themselves vulnerable to trusting men as the leaders that God has endowed with the trust of leadership, that for whatever capricious reason is tied to masculinity, and that any attempt to emulate that, somehow now you are going up against God, you're going up against authority, and you're going up against the reality of gender, which is all just not true. Early Americans, we get like a 3% tax on our tea and we lose our mind, and suddenly we have inalienable rights endowed by our Creator, but somehow we're blind to the fact that that same logic applies equally to people of different skin color, people of different gender, etc. That if you're going to make an appeal based on the imago Dei, the image of God, bearing the image of God, and that we answer to God directly above and beyond any other authority, that applies to us all. And this is why I do believe that even though the message that I have for people that absolutely have zero interest in hearing what I have to say, I still say it because I know that Christ is in the process of subduing all authority and putting everything as a footstool under his authority. And you can see it in things like the colonies breaking off from abuse of power. And you can see it in things like the secular world, in the world of HR that I used to work in. Even the non-believing community is able to recognize that you cannot have a normal, healthy companionship, peer relationship when there is authority in the mix. They will not allow by law somebody to report to somebody that they're having a romantic relationship with. But this is exactly the model that is being taught by Christians, is that we are to have authority between the genders, and specifically in marriage. And you can see how well this system works when we are drowning men in grace to the point where they can literally commit crimes against minors, and we still want to hold them up on a pedestal, put them in a pulpit, and allow them to exercise moral authority. and we demonize the victims, and we tell the people that are complaining about it to go home. That's the context in which we are telling women to be vulnerable and trusting to, and it is enabling abuse. It is in enabling the destruction of those that are not yet aware that they are abusing their authority, and it's also destroying those that are being crushed underneath it. That being said, I've really been meditating quite a bit on Genesis lately, and losing a little hope, because I was arguing even with very young people on Instagram, and they're just so set in their tradition that I make the argument that when you see authority between the genders in Genesis, that is pure eisegesis. You're not able to extract that from the text itself. Genesis 1:28 specifically articulates where authority comes from, and it does not come from any natural process. It is not the result of a sequence of who came first in the creation order. Otherwise, Adam would report to dust because it came before him, and the dust would report to water, which preceded it, and the water would report to darkness. So you can see how absurd the line of logic is when you apply it equally, but still we are so ingrained with our tradition that we're like, well, woman came from man, so therefore man has authority over her. That's not in Genesis. What is in Genesis 1:28 is that authority was granted by God. It comes from God, not from creation, not from any natural process. It comes from a supernatural order directly from God's mouth, and it did not come until after Eve was created. God granted it to them both to rule and subdue the earth. And this is not being reflected at all in the way that MacArthur conducted himself in response to Beth Moore. It's not being reflected at all in all this Christian support for Andy Savage to be risen up on the shoulders of the body and to exercise moral authority over them when he got away with a crime. We are literally drowning God's people in grace. Ecclesiastes 8:11 says that when the human heart does not face immediate consequences for a crime, it's encouraged to do evil. This man got away with a crime that even the secular community would condemn. When that type of thing happened in 1 Corinthians 5:5, we were instructed to hand such a person over to Satan for the destruction of their body, that their soul might be saved on the day of redemption. Where is that, especially in these communities that are telling us to trust and submit to authority, specifically on the basis of gender? Now, where this argumentation is coming from is from Paul, and he does make these arguments, but it is in a clapback to the same type of problem that was in his day, except it wasn't coming from men, it was coming from women. Women were saying that they were superior because they were women. That was their qualification, is that they were able to give birth and that they were more intuitive. This is the Gnostic logic, that they were, because they were in touch with their feelings and what have you, that they were able to be more enlightened than men. And Paul very clearly says that's not a qualification. You don't allow somebody to teach and exercise authority on the basis of gender, and yet that is what we're doing, and we're seeing the fruit of it. And that brings me back to my argument on Instagram. When you present the fruit of this type of complementarian theology that is hell-bent on exalting man over woman, and you present it to people, they do two things. Number one, they victim blame, and they say you're blinded by bitterness because you're a feminist. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself a feminist or not. You're a feminist, therefore whatever you have to say doesn't count. The other thing that they'll do is that when you present your evidence, even if it involves many people in the church, they're like, that's an anomaly. I can dismiss that. That is not the fruit of this this theology that is, anecdotal. And the third thing that they will do is that they will say, okay, fine, your evidence is compelling, but where's the grace? You must have grace and restore this man. Get over it, woman. And I just want to say, where's the grace for the women of God? Where's the grace for the victims? And where is the grace that does not allow a evil heart to grow in evil? It is not edifying to turn a blind eye to wrongdoing. So I just really, really hope, against hope, that the Christian community can get it together and stop grasping at authority and start fulfilling the new commandment that Jesus gave us, which is to love one another. Ew, that's so feminine. Let's get back to like respect and like, obeying rules and things like that. It's just exhausting sometimes. And especially, like I said, life is precious. And I don't know. I wish Christians could be better, because I think there is truth here, but I think it is so deeply camouflaged in our sin that, like the scripture says, it's because of us that unbelievers blaspheme God, and it's disgusting. And I would really, really like to see a change. So I hope that we can love one another, especially like people like me that can see this. We need to love the Pharisees, and we need to try to reach them, even though their ears are plugged up and their eyes are blind. We have to set the example. So that's all I have to say. I hope you guys have a good week. God bless.